Today we're taking a trip into the history of one transgender Catholic woman. I'm joined by my friend Christine Zuba, a transgender woman whose story first moved me at the Outreach 2023 conference. This year she turned 70, and she began her transition just 11 years ago. Her life and ministry have become a powerful witness within transgender Catholic advocacy, and her story has deeply shaped my own. I'm honored to welcome her on the show to share that story with you today. You're listening to Whiplash, a listener-supported podcast exploring Catholicism through the lens of queer liberation theology. I'm Max Kuzma, a transgender man and columnist for the National Catholic Reporter and board member of Dignity USA. Thank you to the paid Substack subscribers who make this work possible. In queer and trans communities, the presence of elders is a rare and precious gift. Often, these types of stories are never, for a number of reasons, told, so younger people lack and in many ways yearn for examples and models, particularly in communities of faith, like Catholic communities. So, when we are given the opportunity to listen to someone who has lived many years carrying this experience and who later stepped fully into her truth, it's a beautiful opportunity to witness that experience with gratitude. My guest today is Christine Zuba, a transgender woman from Blackwood, New Jersey. She is a lifelong Catholic and a parishioner at Saints Peter and Paul Church in Turnersville, New Jersey, where she serves as a Eucharistic Minister and helps facilitate her parish's LGBTQ ministry, Together in Prayer. She also participates in similar ministries across New Jersey, Philadelphia, and New York City. Christine transitioned in 2015, embracing her life as her true self. Since that time, she has become a dedicated advocate for transgender people within the Catholic Church. She serves on the board of directors of Fortunate Families, a national ministry supporting LGBTQ Catholics and their loved ones, and is a member of its transgender ministry. What stands out in Christine's story is not only the courage it took to arrive at this point, but the life that has unfolded since. A life marked by connection, ministry, and a profound sense of joy. It is a reminder that authenticity is not an endpoint, but a beginning. I'm honored to share her story with you today. So, Christine, thank you so much for joining me on Whiplash today. I'm delighted to have you.
I am delighted to be here, Max. Thank you.
I was wondering if we could get started by, it's kind of the question we always get as trans people, but, kind of just an overview of a little bit about yourself, your life, your faith, and kind of how gender identity started to become a question for you.
I will be 70 years old this year. So I may be one of the oldest trans people that you've interviewed on this podcast, but I knew when I was about 4 or 5 that I was different. I know I grew up in the 60s and 70s, so, we didn't have computers, we didn't have cell phones, we had landlines, and I just believed I was the only one in the world that felt that who was like me. I was born and raised Catholic. In northeastern Pennsylvania. My heritage is Polish Catholic. My parents and my grandparents were faithful to the Catholic Church, Catholic faith. We went to, the typical Mass on Sundays, holy days, confession, special events. My dad would often go and I would go with him. I had an older brother, Bobby, who was 4 years older than me, but he was mentally handicapped. My parents had to care for him certainly a lot more than me growing up. But faith was an important part of our lives, my father's and my mom's and my grandparents. I knew that I was trans. I knew I was different when I was very young. And much like Maddie said in her session with you, I go to bed every night hoping I'd wake up a girl. But I never told anyone. I secretly would wear my mom's clothes as I was growing up, as an adolescent, as a teen. Never told anyone. I enjoyed things that boys would do. I enjoyed sports. I still do. I enjoyed sports. I enjoyed school. I have many female cousins growing up, so I played with them quite a bit. I played with girls things. I played with boys things. But as I grew older, and I kept trying to fit into the male role that society expected me to fit into, not knowing that, I could be me someday. And so, I dated. I thought, at different points of my life, I thought, if I did this, if I dated, this would all go away. If I got married, this would go away. If I had kids, this would go away. And we know it doesn't. It never does. And so that was, that was my life, was trying to live the male role for 57 years, 29 years of marriage, 2 children.
Wow.
It was only after a divorce that I started looking further into myself and where I was going. I ended up doing that and ended up transitioning, and life is wonderful.
That's amazing. It makes me think of when I was very early in my transition. I was friends with a trans woman who I believe she was definitely in her 50s when she began her transition as well. And, everything you were talking about the difference in technology and the difference in access to information about being trans, she told me that for her it was the only word or the only access to information about what was different about her that she could find was she would kind of go into the library and look in the dictionary or the encyclopedia at the word transsexual, and that was the only description she had. There was nothing else. Does that resonate to you as well?
Absolutely. I grew up watching Renee Richards, Richard Raskin become Renee Richards, the tennis player. And I can remember watching Renee in a match on TV, a tennis match, thinking that I could, that's what I wanted. That was me. But I'd always thought I could never afford to do that. I could never be her. And it was only much later, I was probably a teen at the time. It was only much later, once I, became employed and graduated from college, and learned more about the process, that I was able to become myself.
Yeah. I also wonder for you as well, if you resonate with this. I transitioned when I was 28, so I was younger, but I definitely felt like there were, as long as there were things in my life that were expected of me. So for me, that was going to school, going to college, getting a professional job. As long as there were things I was checking off, it was kind of like I was holding the trans feelings at bay, and then as soon as I got to a certain point where, now I'm well established and I've worked for several years in professional capacity, now I'm starting to be haunted a lot more by these questions, especially as I see other people around me that are, just carrying on with life and they're flourishing. And in my case, they were getting married and having families. And I was kind of watching from the sidelines, okay, I'm not able to fully show up in these ways because I'm not fully me, but for you, that sense of, okay, as long as there's, the script, the social script to follow, maybe then I can hold it back.
Yeah, I always thought I could, hold that back. And however, even after I got married and in my professional career, I was in sales. And my company made equipment for TV and radio stations. So I had the opportunity to travel all over the country and to a little bit to different parts of the world.
So cool.
The trip to Thailand one time was absolutely crazy. But during that time, I had, clothes that I had hidden. And so I would take them with me, clothes and makeup, and take them with me on my trips, my business trips. And then perhaps, after my last business meeting that evening, I would get dressed. Once in a while, I would go out someplace, always afraid that, somebody would make me as a trans person. But I did that for many, many, many years. And it was agony, living two lives. I mean, absolute agony until, and it did put a stress on my relationship with my wife at the time because I was always on the road. We started arguing, and things just got so bad that we just, after 29 years, it was enough. And then once we separated, I started looking into conferences. Particularly, I found the Keystone Conference in Harrisburg, which is like 500, 600 trans people over a weekend in March. And I attended for the first time. And, there are sessions, all sorts of sessions on religion, sessions on transitioning, sessions on makeup and dress, and with therapists. And I can still remember the first conference I went to, and I went to a lot of those sessions. I was crying. I could not even ask a question because I knew if I asked the question, I would cry. And so I went home and I went to the conference again the next year, and I was able to. The second year I went, I was able to control myself a little bit, my emotions, and I was able to ask questions of people, and I met a lot of people at both conferences. And after the second conference, I said to myself, I cannot come back here anymore, living two lives. I can't do it. I just can't do it anymore. And that's when I sought out a therapist, and that kind of started the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm curious too, like, I definitely have more questions about how the experience went from there, but I want to pull in the Catholicism a little bit more. I'm curious what the Catholicism that you grew up in was like in terms of, for me, it was more like a insular bubble where, you're not supposed to listen to this type of music and you're not supposed to do this kind of stuff. And then when I transitioned, I started to find, okay, there's actually this whole Vatican II church. There's a lot more different expressions of Catholicism that are more welcoming. I'm kind of curious where you found yourself in all of that.
It's funny because when I was young, everything was in Latin. So, and the priest had his back to you, and we sang in Latin, even though I didn't know what the words meant. I knew the words in Latin, but I didn't know what they meant. And then slowly things changed to English, and the priest started facing you. And but growing up, the priest that I was familiar with focused mainly on the gospel and right and wrong and those basic things. There wasn't much talk of LGBTQ issues at all, and that really didn't enter into my consciousness at all. I was just trying to be, faithful to, growing up, just faithful to my Catholic faith. And it wasn't until, I started contemplating transitioning that I started paying more attention to LGBTQ issues within the church. And at that time, this was 13 years ago, the focus was mainly on, lesbian and gays. There was almost no mention of transgender persons. That came a number of years later once they thought they had us figured out.
Yeah. Yeah. And then as well, I'm curious, something that we've talked a lot about is, I know that you've written and spoken about it, and I've written and spoken about it, this idea of when we transitioned, our relationship with God deepened. Could you say more about that from your perspective?
When you wrote about that, I think a couple of years ago, and this was right before the conference at Georgetown, and I used your quote because it fit perfectly about how much joy I felt internally and exuded externally. And I was told that by friends who knew me for, 50 years. And I just felt my relationship with God and my faith was so much stronger. Growing up, I was kind of an introvert. And I didn't say a lot, didn't get involved in a lot of conversations, didn't go up to someone and say, hello, my name is. And once I transitioned, as I was transitioning, I just felt that there's something more. There's got to be something more to transitioning. And I knew so many people, friends who were trans, that could not believe that I remained Catholic and a faithful Catholic and was trans because they had left the church or they were told to leave the church.
Right.
And I just felt that if my visibility within the Catholic Church could help in some way, maybe not directly, but maybe indirectly, by kind of lifting everyone up, not thinking that I can do such a thing, but just by being visible and being somewhat a little bit outspoken, that if I could make some kind of contribution to change, it would be a good thing. And we're all put on this earth for a reason. God put us here for a reason. I'm still trying to figure it out, but I'm hopefully I'm doing what God wants me to do.
Well, I definitely think you are, and I really resonate with that too, of feeling that sense that in being our authentic selves, we can show, like I always think of it as, we can show that yes, you can be transgender and Catholic. It's, that's possible, and being a witness to that. And so I'm curious to know, so how did your, I guess, some of your advocacy start? What are some of the first ways that you got involved or things that you did?
As I was transitioning, and before I even told my mom, who was 87 at the time, my company was the last to know, but my mom was the last of my family and friends. But as I was transitioning, I knew I had to speak to a priest.
Yeah.
So it was a Saturday afternoon before the 4:00 Mass. We have confession. And so I went in to speak to our priest, and it was our associate priest. And so I said my confession, and then I said, Father, now I have something a little more challenging to talk about. And so I told him I was trans. And my appearance was still male at the time, that I was transitioning. And immediately the conversation went to sex. And I said, excuse me, Father, this has absolutely nothing to do with sex. This has to do with who I am. I said, you can throw me out if you want, but if you do, I'm coming right back in, because this is my church too. I have been a parishioner there 20 years. And if he threw me out, I would have been shocked, but he said, no, we're not going to do that. So thankfully. And then, so we talked a little bit more. And at the end of the conversation, he said, let's together say a prayer to the Blessed Mother to help guide you on your journey. I was crying. I was literally crying when I walked out of confession. And about 2 weeks later, I went back to confession. It was our Monsignor. And his first words were, God loves everyone. But he did say that he understood gay and lesbian issues and so forth, had been exposed to that for many, many years. But he did admit that the transgender issue was new to him, and I would have to help him understand.
Yeah.
So we had many conversations after that. And it was as I was transitioning and after I transitioned, I said, someone at the diocese was speaking at a mass. And after Mass, I went up and asked him, I said, is the diocese doing anything for LGBTQ Catholics? And he says, well, as a matter of fact, it's on our agenda. And he told me who to talk to. And so I immediately went home and I emailed her. It was Mary Lou. I emailed Mary Lou. And within about 10 minutes, I got an email back. And she says, yeah, it's on something we're talking about and thinking about. So that started a conversation with the diocese. And I told Monsignor about it, and I said, and we talked about starting an LGBTQ group in the church. The diocese was dragging their feet, and Monsignor said, let's just do it. So we started the group. It's small. In fact, it's still small, although we joined with another parish, which is about a couple miles away in New Jersey, and but it's still small. But somehow through that LGBTQ ministry, which I posted on Facebook, a man by the name of David Harvey in Central Jersey, who's a facilitator of his parish's ministry called In God's Image, which is well over 100 people and the largest ministry in New Jersey. He contacted me, and that started a relationship with his ministry, and I found out about other ministries across the state of New Jersey and got to know more and more people. That's how I got to know Father Alex Santora at Our Lady of Grace in Hoboken. That's how I got to meet Father Jim Martin.
Aha.
And so that kind of started that ball rolling on a small scale. And then once people start to hear you talk and speak, they oh, come on, can you come over here and talk to us? Can you talk to this group? And slowly but surely, people see you, they know you, they ask you to speak to their ministry in their diocese, or they ask you, and that's Father Jim Martin asked me to speak. I was honored to be asked at Outreach, just like you were 2 years ago at Georgetown. And Outreach is great because you meet so many people doing similar things all over the world, and it gives you hope. That's for sure for our church, where perhaps years ago you might have felt if you're by yourself, sometimes you don't feel any hope at all. But
Yeah.
there are people all over the world that are working for us, and that is amazing.
Yes, and I think as well that outreach is where someone else discovered you as well, that led to a trip to Rome.
Yeah, for both of us.
Yes.
Yeah, well, at outreach it was the second one, which was 23, I think, at Fordham.
I think so.
So it was 21, 20, 22, 23 at Fordham. 24 was at Georgetown. Well, at outreach in 2023, I was on a panel, and I was the last one to speak. And then it opened up for Q&A, and I was still standing at the podium, and this priest in the back of the room stood up, starts yelling at me in Italian and pointing his finger at me while he's yelling. And I'm thinking, my goodness, what did I say to this man to get him so upset? And then his interpreter stood up and said, "This is Father Andrea Conicchia from his parish outside of Rome. And Father Andrea is the one who had been taking groups of transgender women to meet Pope Francis."
Mm-hmm.
And he was thanking us for the work that we were doing. And so I was like, oh my goodness. And he speaks no English. So afterwards he came up and took pictures with us. And that started a relationship, a friendship, where I would email him, or using WhatsApp, he'd send me a message in Italian. I'd have to translate it, and then I'd write it and translate it into Italian, send it back to him. So then at the conference in 2024 at Georgetown, after Cardinal Gregory's Mass, I went up and found him and gave him a big hug. And standing next to him was Camilla Barone from NCR as his interpreter. Camillo said, Father Andrea said, "Come to Rome, I'll take you to meet Pope Francis." And I started crying. And I said, "When?" And he said, "Next week."
That's a whirlwind.
I'm like, I can't go next week. I was like, so, but it turned out that I was going to be in Europe the next month, because my partner, Michael, his niece was getting married in Hungary. So we had already planned to go to Hungary and to do a river cruise on the Danube. So we kind of worked it out. So that next month, at the end of our trip, instead of coming home, we would go to Rome. And
amazing.
So it was funny because he asked for Maureen Rasmussen as well. So I called Maureen up. I said, "Maureen, how'd you like to meet the Pope?" She goes, "What?" I says, "Oh, yeah." She goes, "Father Don Andrea wants us to come to Rome and meet Pope Francis." So it ended up being myself, Maureen Rasmussen, and then also it ended up being Linda Senza and from Hartford and Martha Marvel from Green Bay. So the four of us all met, coming from different directions. We went to Father Andrea's church. How we got there via subway and via a bus. It's like an hour outside of Rome. We found our way there, and we found our way home, amazingly. And yeah, then he took us to meet Pope Francis. And you went a month later, right? It was through Father Andrea, right?
Yes, yes. I'm not sure the exact sequence of I think Brother Christian may have been nearby when that conversation was happening, and then he was also invited, and then he was putting together a group, and then there was like some people that weren't able to go, and then I wasn't sure if I was able to go, but then I was able to go, so it all worked out for me as well. But how tell me about how it was for you and what it meant to meet Pope Francis, specifically that pope.
Well, we know how much he's done for us, for the
Yeah.
LGBTQ community. Um, over 10 years. He was Pope for 12 years. The first couple of years were slow, much like Pope Leo's first year now is somewhat slow. But over the last 10 years, things have changed so much.
Yeah.
Um, but I leading up to meeting Pope Francis, when we went to see Don Andrea down at his parish, we had coffee, a cappuccino, or espresso. I can't remember what it was. Right on the little cafe on the Mediterranean there, talking about meeting. And they kept saying, whatever you do, don't cry. And every time I thought of meeting him, I just started crying. So I'm like, how am I not going to cry? But you want to say what you want to say. So you have to concentrate so you don't lose it. And but I really felt, maybe you did the same thing. Before we met Pope Francis, we were asked to write a one-page summary, each of us, about what we did for the church in our own little world, and what we wanted Pope Francis to know.
Yeah.
So that was translated by Camillo into Italian, I believe. And then Don Andrea made sure Pope Francis got them and made sure Pope Francis read them. And I really feel it was as important for Pope Francis to meet us as it was to meet him. And I don't mean that it was amazing. It was absolutely a meeting of a lifetime to meet Pope Francis. But I really think it was important for him to meet us, because we all came from, his interaction was with the women from Italy.
Yeah.
I don't think he met with many people outside of his,
Right.
of Rome, the Rome area. So to meet people in different places, doing different things, and also involved with their church, I felt it was really important for him to meet with us. And then he met with you, your group, and then he met with Michael Sennett in the New Ways Ministry group. I think he learned a lot. And whether it was a coincidence or not, since he met our groups, there was nothing negative from Rome or from Pope Francis' lips about transgender people. Absolutely nothing at all. And, we saw Dignitas Infinita. We heard some of the other things, gender ideology, all those things for years. But, in the last 6 months, there was nothing. And I always say Pope Francis, he didn't tell his cardinals or his bishops what to do. He was trying to show them, by meeting with LGBTQ people, by meeting with trans people.
Yes.
He was showing the local priests that it's okay to reach out. It's okay to minister to those on the margins, to talk to us without fear that we're just people like everyone else. I just finished reading Pope Francis's autobiography. Have you read it yet?
Oh, I haven't read it. I do have it on my shelf.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the first half of the book is a little more difficult to read. I'm not Italian, And he talks about his parents, his grandparents, his friends, his neighbors, growing up in Argentina, his history. And there's so many Italian names. I get confused who is who. But when he starts talking about going to the conclave and talking to the other cardinals and people telling him that he's going to be the Pope and he thinks they're just kidding with him and all this stuff. And then he begins, the second half of the book is him talking about being Pope and reaching out to people on the margins. And the one thing that struck me, and it didn't strike me until I read the book, he talks about, he mentions gender ideology again. And he says about gender ideology seeks to eliminate the differences between men and women. Idea goes back to the 50s and 60s. That concept of erasing the differences between men and women, if there is such a thing as gender ideology, it's the opposite of that. It's saying that there isn't just men and women. There's everything in between. It's a spectrum, as we know. So, he was looking at it from the 1950s and 60s era, but it's not again, if there is such a thing, it's that there's so many different variations between just men and women that, we're just an example of the wonder of God's, creation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always feel that way too, that not only that an expression of God's creativity through diversity, but also just, when you look at the natural world, diversity is a good thing. Diversity is a sign of growth and forward movement, and diversity is where we get different perspectives that help us to look at problems in different ways and try to solve them, and just the way that I know that my own, you spoke about in your professional career, being able to travel and meet different people. And I'm sure through those experiences that enriched you in your life, getting to see things from a different perspective, getting to try different food, like getting to see more of the world than just the narrow perspective of just the way that you grew up, or just the one town where you were born. There's so much more to the world. I get a little excited about that, so I don't mean to go on too much about that, but I totally agree with you on that.
No, I have been, if you look at the life of Jesus Christ, the people that he associated with, they were diverse.
Yes.
He believed in equity for everyone, and he was inclusive of everyone. So, and DEI, that was Jesus,
I agree.
And that should not be something to erase. That should be something to embrace. And I didn't mean to rhyme, but but no, it's true. That's our Catholic faith. It's diversity, it's equity, and it's inclusive.
Yes. And I think that's also I really agree with what you were saying about meeting Pope Francis, and as particularly what you said about the power of him meeting us as much as us meeting him, because of course for any individual, not many people have the opportunity to meet the Pope just in general. So it's already a very, as you say, once in a lifetime thing. But I really did feel the same as you. And I definitely, on the plane, I was going over and over how much I would say or what order I would put the information that I wanted to say to him. I was like, well, I could say this, and then I could also tell him this, and then I was getting so long. I was like, I'm going to have too much that I'm not going to be able to get this all out in this short period of time. But what became important to me was I knew it was going to be really important to just stay as calm and grounded as possible, so that I could make that direct eye contact, take his hand, and so that as much as I'm seeing him, that he can actually see me. I didn't want to be like I was worried about being nervous. I don't cry particularly easily.
Yeah.
So I wasn't worried about crying, but I was worried about being jittery. So I was just really focused on just being very calm and just saying, this is who I am, treating him in that way.
And in seconds, it's over.
I know. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of look at the people you came with like, did that really just happen?
Yeah, and then I look at Michael Sennett and the New Ways Ministry group that were there for like 45 minutes or more, and I am so jealous. I am so jealous of that. But no, good for them. Good for them.
I would have loved to be a fly on the wall in that one as well with the group that New Ways had together. I believe they had an endocrinologist and an intersex person, which I thought that was really important too. But yeah, like with Pope Francis in the model of the inclusion that you're talking about, and in the model of, that's what I really love about Pope Francis is that he was willing to be with people and not just willing, but so that was such a motivating force for him of, from the beginning, not wanting to display like the idea of the wealth of the church, going for the more simple way of dressing, the more simple crucifix. He kept his simple workman style shoes. Like, I don't know, that means so much to see for somebody who is in such a position of importance in the church and in the world.
And his autobiography, when you read it, you'll understand the man. That's how he grew up. Very simple. Very. He associated, and everybody on the street. There were prostitutes. There were and it's just people being people. It's just he was a man of the people until his last day.
Absolutely.
Now, and hopefully, Pope Leo seems to be. We pray for him, and we hope that what he does for the LGBTQ community. Hopefully, he'll start meeting with us, like Pope Francis did, to again be an example for others.
Absolutely. And so I want to kind of going back to advocacy, like how you got involved in things. I'm curious as well. I know that you're very involved in Fortunate Families.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how some of those type of things got started for you.
I was somehow, I had a business meeting in New York City with my boss. And so somewhere, it could have been through social media or something, I saw J.R. Zurkowski, who is the executive director of Fortunate Families, was speaking. I think it was at St. Ignatius Loyola, the one night that I was going to be in New York. So I told my boss, I said that, I was going to go listen to J.R. If you don't mind, I'm going to skip dinner. So he said, no, absolutely, go ahead. So I took a cab over there, and, J.R. spoke. And then afterwards, I went up and introduced myself to JR. And this is probably 8 years ago, maybe 7, 8 years ago. Time flies. And as you get older, it goes faster. So you'll find out someday. But I went up and talked to JR. And he said that Fortunate Families was considering starting a transgender ministry. Would I be interested in participating? And I said, absolutely. So he said, okay, we'll be in touch. Well, about a month or so later, I got an email from JR saying, okay, we've started this ministry. A couple people will be in touch with you to do a Zoom call. And that's how I got involved. The couple, a married couple who have a gay son, were leading the ministry. And after a little while, they stepped aside and they said, Christine, you should lead it because you are trans. And so I said, okay. And then they elected me to the board. So I became involved, and that's how I got to know Sister Louisa Duran, Deacon Ray Dever, God bless his soul, wonderful man. I got to know Marianne Duddy Burke because I was part of Fortunate Families and see her at different events. Frank from New Ways Ministry, then got involved with Fortunate Families because we were doing kind of webinars. We did webinars for priests, we did them for deacons, we did them for religious on trans issues with Sister Louisa. And then Sister Louisa wanted to record her life's work. And working with her, we recorded about 14 sessions dealing with all sorts of aspects of transgender life.
Amazing.
And non-binary life. And those recordings we've used in educating a good number of people. I'd say probably at this point about 60, 70 people. And we have a session completing, almost complete now, where people will, for twice a month, over maybe 7 months, we form a cohort, and we play the video, and we discuss the video, and people learn about transgender people and how to accompany them in their faith journey. And that's been wonderful to do. But just meeting so many people, and Father Jim Martin I think he's an advisor to Fortunate Families. Bishop John Stowe as well. It's been amazing, this journey, and all because of the one little ministry we started a number of years ago, and it's kind of, I have been blessed. That is for certain. I've been blessed in my personal life, in my faith life, and in my business life as well. It's my journey was just when I came out, when I finally made the decision to come out 13 years ago, or when I first went to therapy, I can't do this. I'll lose my friends, I'll lose my family, I'll lose my faith, I'll lose my job. And after about 9 months, it was, I can't not do this. And I was prepared to lose everything if I had to, because I had to finally be myself. Like I said, I've been blessed. And I have some guy friends that I've known since childhood. And they all embraced me. It's funny because the one man who was the best man in my wedding many, many years ago, he and his wife, they had 2 children, and they're now grown. But their one child saw how they reacted to me coming out as trans. And about 2 years later, their child announced that they were trans as well. And she told her parents that she saw how she had the courage to come out as her true self because they saw how they reacted and loved me. And so
Beautiful.
She felt safe to do so herself. And she's, like all of us, like many of us are, happiest she's ever been. Absolutely.
It's such a testament to the power of, and I think your whole story too, of the power of actually knowing a transgender person and what it means when we have the opportunity to be in a relationship with a priest or be in a relationship with a community that is a faith community. And when we can share about what our experiences are like, I feel there's so much ripple effect that, you can't even predict what the impact of that positive visibility and representation will be.
I was in sales, and we had we had 3 other salespeople, guys. And so I was on a business trip with one of them. And so we, after the day was over, we sat down in a bar, had dinner, and we just talked. And this guy was a very conservative Republican. And we did this a couple of times over 6 months. And then he said to me, you changed me. He goes, I'm different. He goes, just learning more about you, I just feel differently about transgender people. He goes, he goes, I'm a different person. And, I don't think any of us go into a conversation trying to change someone.
Right. Yeah.
I think we just want them to understand and listen without judgment and just listen. They may not, at the end of the conversation, they may feel the same way about certain things, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Somebody's feelings are their own personal feelings. But if we could just, open that little door a little bit and get them to listen, then when they hear something about somebody else or something else going on,
right,
they'll think back to that conversation, and that might have some effect. And that's all we want.
Absolutely. It reminds me of when I was starting my transition, I was living in Mobile, Alabama, which was kind of funny because I was born and raised in the Midwest and only lived in like Indiana and Ohio, and then lived in Alabama for just like 3 years. That's where I met my partner. And then we moved back to Ohio because my partner's family is all from Ohio and stuff. But it was just funny to be in Alabama at that time of transition and, coming to discover myself. But when I was living there, I lived in Midtown, which is a small community with a lot of really quiet streets that are good for walking or biking. And there was a local bike shop that I hadn't. So prior to transition and pretty much after puberty, being active outside was just very uncomfortable. I just felt, and before I knew the word dysphoria, I would have just said, I just don't feel comfortable. But, I know now it was dysphoria. It was just moving my body too much was just very uncomfortable. And, but as I started my journey of transition, and even before I had any huge dramatic changes to my body, I already had begun to feel more connected to my body and because I was more connected to myself. I was being more true to myself. I wasn't spending all this time and energy, pushing this thing down or pushing this thing away. And I happened to walk into that bike shop and struck up a conversation with the owner. His name, well, maybe I won't say his name just for his own privacy, but he was really, really nice. And I ended up buying a bike from him. And I thought, okay, well, that's, kind of the end of it, except buying a bike from him meant that you would also get like lifetime care of the bike, really, I could bring it in and ask questions and all that. And I was really completely new to biking. So I actually ended up coming back to that bike shop many times with just little different things like questions that I would have, or, I started to get more adventurous. So then I wanted to get like lights that I could put on there so that it would be more visible and all that. And what ended up happening is, it's interesting, because he's a man who owns a bike shop, and he had a son who was a student athlete, who actually, I believe, was in tryouts for like Olympic tryouts for something. So my point being, this is like a very serious athletic family, and it was just so interesting because obviously at the time, this was 5 or 6 years ago. And so, it wasn't exactly as it is today with discussions about trans issues, but they were definitely beginning to be discussed. And particularly it was about athletics, right? And so it was really interesting to begin having this relationship with this person. And I was open and honest about my experiences with transition, because, I would go there after I biked to work, because I lived close enough that I could do that. And then, we would be talking about the bike, and we would have these long conversations. And it was just so interesting, because he would have this resistance to this idea of trans athletes on the one hand as this, abstract theory, but then he was having this real relationship with me. And, I moved away, so I didn't really know if he was even still there or if he had moved, but I returned back maybe 3 years after we had had that relationship. And so, at that point now, when I returned back, I looked very different. So when I walked in, it took him a second, and then he was like, "Max," and he recognized me, and he told me, hearing your story, and and the things that you went through, and the way that people in your life responded, it really, really profoundly impacted me. And it changed the way that I think about transgender people because of your example. And so, I don't know exactly where he ended on any of the individual issues in that way, but just to echo what you're saying of like, yeah, when people have that opportunity to actually encounter us. And that's that same echo of what it meant to meet Pope Francis and what Pope Francis was modeling for everybody else. So I just feel so blessed to get to know you as well, Christine, and that you spoke about getting to go to the conferences and seeing what people are doing all over the country. And I think that's very true as well. I get very inspired by seeing the different ministries, but also just to have that feeling of, yeah, I'm not alone. I know that Christine is out there who is engaged in the same work, who has been through things that I've been through, and that like just the beauty of that is profound to me.
No, I thank you, Max. The work that you're doing and others like you are doing. Young people. It's young people. You are our church. Things may not change enough in my lifetime, but hopefully, when you're my age, you're going to see a lot of good change in our church. And it's funny because when I came out, my company was supportive, and we sold equipment to TV and radio stations. So my customers were VPs of all the major networks, major groups, PBS, even some mom and pops, and so all over the country, even Mexico, Puerto Rico, and some parts of Europe and Asia. And my company was concerned as to how our customers were going to react.
Right.
And the day I came out, before the day I came out, I had a date set. It took me about almost a whole year I had it all laid out, who I was going to tell when, my friends, my family, my mom, my work. So I had already spoken to many of the VPs from the various networks, and they were like, "Well, please tell us you're not leaving, are you?" Or it was like, "Oh, we have trans people working for us now," so it's like no big deal. And the day I came out, a letter went out to like 200 people, telling them. And the support I got back in emails, I got emails from people telling me they were gay. I got an email from one person telling me that they were closeted trans. It was just so heartwarming. And then as time went on, and as we post on Facebook and on social media, some of these very same customers see what we're doing, saw what I was doing, and I would get an email here and there saying, "Oh, by the way, I'm Catholic. You didn't know this, but I'm Catholic, and I admire the work that you're doing." And I was like, wow, I never knew that, and it just, it lifts you up when you get that one phone call, when you have an LGBTQ ministry. Sometimes there's frustrations, you don't get as many people attend that you might normally like to, or some stumbling block occurs. But then when you get a call from the diocese saying, can you talk to this person? They need some help, or they would like to talk to somebody in your ministry. It makes all the difference in the world, just to help one person. It means so much.
Yes, and especially in a world that is so concerned with virality, whatever is the biggest. We want the biggest amount of people to see this thing, and da 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 da. But I think what you and I have both experienced in many different ways in our lives is that power of that one person encounter. Because when you really do have that meaningful encounter with one person, that's the ineffable mystery that is hard to even pinpoint, because it's like you never know how or in what way that will move that person, and maybe it's just in some cases, maybe it's just someone sees your example, like the example of your friend who then their child saw how they responded to you. You can't like, it's not like a linear formula. It's not like this viral meme. It's something that is real and powerful.
Yeah, a number of years ago, Father Alex Santora, pastor of Our Lady of Grace in Hoboken, asked me to participate in the homily of their Pride Mass. They have an annual Pride Mass. I think this was the 5th annual at the time. So it was kind of a Q&A with Father and Alex asked me some questions and I would answer and so forth. And then after the Mass, they had a reception. And so during the reception, this woman came up to me with 2 children. And they looked like they might have been like 8 and 10 years old. And the older one looked like they might be trans or non-binary. So she came up to me and she had a very thick accent, Eastern European accent. And so she thanked me for my words. And she said that they were from Poland and that things aren't so good for us back there. And that they were going back to Poland later that same day. And she said that she specifically wanted to bring her children to Our Lady of Grace to that Pride Mass so that they could see what is possible. And I'm like, my God, how hard that must be to be in a country like that that's not so welcoming. Hopefully we don't get to that stage here in this country. I don't think we'll let it happen. But anyway, just that meant a lot for her, just to say thank you for that, to see what is possible. And that's what you're doing. And that's what so many other people are doing by, speaking out, the work you're doing with NCR, with Dignity. I didn't know you were on the board. That's wonderful. With this podcast, and word gets around. You're changing the world. You're changing our church.
Thank you, Christine.
Yeah, do good things.
I really appreciate all of your time this evening and everything that you've shared. Before we kind of wrap up here, I just want to know if there's anything that we didn't cover that you think would be good to include, or if you feel good about the content, if there's any kind of final word. You did just do a beautiful job of speaking about the hope that you feel and the importance of the work, but if you have any final things to add.
I watched the previous podcast that you did, and at the end you asked the question, like, what would you say to somebody who is perhaps kind of still disappointed with the church, maybe estranged from the church and so forth.
Yeah.
I thought of that. I said, I understand. I think we all understand somebody who has felt hurt by the Catholic Church in some way. Certainly those who have been abused, it's unbelievable there. But for those of us who are trans or even LGBTQ who felt hurt by the Church, don't give up. There's a lot of people around this whole world working hard for our inclusion and for and love us and want us to be included. And they're working to change the Church. So don't give up hope. You may feel somewhat hopeless now, but just stay in touch, because we know our Church moves slowly like a glacier, but it's changing, and the work of people like you're doing, Max, you're helping to make that change. So I thank you for all that you do.
Stories like Christine's matter because they remind us that queer and trans life in the Church is not new. It has always been there, even when it has gone unseen or unspoken. To listen to these stories is to honor that history and to ensure it's not lost. If this conversation resonated with you and you're interested in preserving and learning from queer Catholic stories, I encourage you to check out Emma Cieslik's Queer and Catholic Oral History Project, available on Substack. Thank you for listening to Whiplash. If you'd like to support the show, you can subscribe, share this episode, or consider becoming a paid subscriber. Until next time.